Hello, this is Dr. Jason Munsell. It is about a little after 7 on Thursday evening, February the 2nd. Happy Groundhog's Day, whatever. Hope you're doing well. Hope you use Tuesday night to your advantage. Again, I apologize, but I just had so much stuff going on with SSCA, as I still do, actually. What I wanted to do was to offer you just a little bit of information about Chapter 5, the stuff on sports, comm, and myth. And actually, I'll get through a little bit of this, but not a whole lot. And I'll actually give you more over the weekend because there's some extra stuff about the Super Bowl that I want you to think about. And also I put some extra reading there about the Super Bowl that hopefully you will consider reading because it's cool. Okay, so, and I know you're all working on all your various things, and just let me know how I can help. But let me get to this. Okay. A new lecture by me. The man, the myth, the legend. I'm just playing with this idea of myth. Can you hear that music? It's way too loud, actually. I got my 80s channel on. I miss you like crazy, which I do. Delicious green tea here. It's not really green. Ah, boy, it's delicious though. I will let you go to the links here on my online lectures. I don't really like to just go to the links because I don't want to waste your time. You can do it however you want to. But this is sort of the beginning, or not beginning, but a part of the classic Oscar award-winning film called Caddyshack. And it's the part where Bill Murray's character is pretending he's at the Masters and he's hitting the flowers and Cinderella story. And so this idea of Cinderella story and all the David versus Goliath, that's in part some of the stuff that we're talking about here, the relationship between sport and sports and myths. But first, what is mythology? Mythology and myth does not necessarily mean that it is automatically false. That's not really what it's not like this is a lie. That's just a myth. Not really. Mythology is basically just stories that are told over and over again within a given culture that supply the listeners or the readers of the story important cultural lessons, whatever they might be. The book does talk about issues of Greek and Roman myths, Achilles' heel, and all that type of stuff. King Midas, the Midas touch for mufflers. But in any case, basically it is a way of thinking about how sports, through the process of mythology, which is always sort of a story, offers us certain ways of looking at the world, thinking about ourselves, thinking about issues of community, and all that jazz. So one of the things that this is closely aligned to is the narrative paradigm, and I have put extra stuff on KC for you to read. That it comes from Walter Fisher. But the basic idea is that we very often, his theory, his argument is that we reason about our lives through the idea of story. We sort of make our lives a story. We reflect on the previous chapters of our life and what the chapters might be in the future, and the conclusion, and then the glossary, and we're excited. But that's just a way of thinking, way of logic, and it's a lens, a way of seeing the world. And so there are some important terms when we're thinking about just this whole larger mythological way of thinking about things / narrative way of thinking about things. So we're always going to have the idea of myth. Myth itself is that cultural story, but it also oftentimes goes through a process, and that process is usually called sort of a ritual. the classic story of the hero going through a sort of a ritual or a trial, whatever you want to call it, is sort of the archetypal story that we're thinking about here. And this goes back to the structure of pretty much every sort of heroic or hero's myth out there. In fact, some of the stuff that George Lucas did when he created the very first Star Wars actually borrowed from Joseph Campbell, who put together in part this heroic process, journey, story, whatever, from all these different hero stories. But basically, if you know the Star Wars story, here's this kid, Luke Skywalker, who is called away to use the Force and learn how to use the Force, and then he fights people and he wins and he gets the girl. Not really though, because that's his sister, and he thinks that he's beating the bad guy, but it's really his dad. Yeah, if you haven't seen that, I'm sorry. Spoilers. So basically, hero leaves home, learns new things, comes back home, new person has slayed the dragon. So very common sort of story. More terms. I'll let you read all the stuff about baseball. I do think that's really interesting. All this stuff. But here's the big thing. On the bottom of page 94, I think, is the big sort of theoretical thing that I want you in part to remember, besides the narrative paradigm, which is also that little box there. This isn't theoretically speaking. Communication scholars examine these features of baseball's history and ask, why and how did this mythology develop, like the birthplace of baseball and all that type of stuff? If you heard that, sorry. What does this mythology communicate about us as a people, and what needs are served by constructing this myth? Certainly, Americans invest a great deal in the game they call the national pastime. In other words, baseball is more than a sport, it is a cultural institution that claims to be an exemplar of American character. From this standpoint, mythology becomes an essential means for communicating and reinforcing the very identity that binds Americans together. Woo! What is interesting about myth, then, is not whether or not it is true, but to what extent it feels true. Perhaps to borrow Stephen Colbert's famous term, myths have truthiness. Oh, that's fun. And then they talk about mythos, which is, again, basically the same idea of thinking about things logically through the process of myth, sort of a story. And one of the things that I have here, you can watch it, but hype videos have become sort of a ritual. And if you watch like this Clemson hype video, you see a story there. You see sort of a hero story. They lost to Alabama last year, but now they're seeking revenge. They have worked hard, blah, 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 blah. It's a story. What's that story teaching? I don't know. But that's... And then I just put this last thing here because it's funny. If you all remember the 1985 Chicago Bears and the Super Bowl Shuffle, we ain't here to cause no trouble. We're here just to do the Super Bowl Shuffle. Yeah. Sports myths. One of the things that I think is really interesting that the book talks about is this notion of particular versus universal. So there are obviously these particular functions that certain myths have, but they can also refer to larger universal types of ideas and values. I'm trying to find it. For instance, well, think about the famous what's his name? Oh, George Washington. I've got a little finger puppet of George Washington over there. Chop down a cherry tree. I can't tell a lie, Dad. Chop down a cherry tree. So it's about a cherry tree and George Washington, but it's also about this universal idea of truth. Be truthful. Gosh, I cannot find this stuff. Okay. Myths are not particular to the sports world, and that's very fun. Yeah, absolutely. So basically, the idea is that there are certain things that become or sort of have mythic status within a particular sport. They talk about Babe Ruth, Brandy Chastain, shirt removal during the women's 1999 World Victory. And they can be, in a sense, about those particular things, but also they can be transcendent. That is, surely you can identify several other moments, each of these has in common is that they feature either transcendent athletes or championship moments that persist in our collective sports memories. In this way, sports mythology is a way of preserving the best of our past as we try our best to move forward in the future. It talks about Muhammad Ali, Willis Reed's miraculous recovery from a leg injury, Kerry Strug's final vault, of course the United States beating the Soviets. And that's sort of a big deal because it was, yes, about particular versus universal. It was, in a sense, about hockey, but also about our moral superiority over those nasty commies. So they have some sort of they're about specific things and particular events, but they have these larger universal values that transcends the particular and becomes larger lessons for all of us that we can apply in our lives. The next thing is just sort of this, it can have positive or negative functions. It talks about a lot of these types of myths do serve very positive functions for sports organizations, media, and fans. They bring us together. They can teach things like resilience. You got to work hard and all these, teamwork, blah, blah, blah. But sometimes they're not terribly positive. They talk about issues of hockey and violence. And so the myth of violence or the story of violence is not always good. People get hurt. The idea of toughness and hand-to-hand combat that oftentimes people, we craft masculinity through a lot of this stuff, and oftentimes being tough and violent is masculine, which is problematic. And then it talks about mythic identity. One of my buddies here, Sean O'Rourke, had talked about how a lot of folks in Cleveland saw the Cleveland Browns and the Cleveland itself as sort of a particular, it had a particular mythic identity. The town, the team, the people, the fans of the team. He says Cleveland is a diverse, multicultural urban community that accepted waves of immigrants as labor for his heavy industry. As they had found success that became associated with this diverse blue-collar ethic as part of also other cities in the Rust Belt, blah, 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 blah. Thus, when the Browns owner, Art Modell, announced in 1995 that he would relocate the team, local fans reacted as if they were losing a family member. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that in there. Oftentimes, we talk about issues of perhaps the most common story in the United States, the American dream, the whole rags to riches and all that type of stuff. And we see that a lot. Athletes of humble origins work hard, achieve greatness in the field or the arena. Of course, the downside of the myth is it equates success with individual effort and potentially ignores economic, political, and social factors that could prevent someone from achieving success. Yeah. Also, another part of this particular section on sports myth, a myth is, the stories are not just manifested in the actual playing of